Henry Thorne stood at the edge of the rocky cliff, his eyes scanning the horizon. The ocean stretched out in a vast, unbroken expanse of gray, merging seamlessly with the fog that enveloped the island. The lighthouse behind him cast a solitary beam of light through the mist, a vigilant guardian against the treacherous waters below. Henry's weathered face, marked by years of salt and wind, was etched with a deep-seated loneliness that had become his constant companion. The island was a desolate place, a solitary outpost battered by the relentless forces of nature. Waves crashed against the jagged rocks with a ferocity that mirrored Henry's own inner turmoil. The wind howled mournfully through the crevices of the lighthouse, a haunting symphony that underscored his isolation. Each day bled into the next with monotonous regularity, the passing of time marked only by the steady rotation of the lighthouse beacon. Henry's life had been reduced to a series of repetitive tasks: maintaining the lighthouse, ensuring the oil lamps were filled, and keeping the machinery in working order. He took solace in the routine, finding a semblance of purpose in the maintenance of the light that warned sailors of the island's perilous shores. Yet, beneath the surface, a creeping unease gnawed at him. A sense that something was amiss in the very fabric of his existence. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the fog thickened, Henry noticed a strange sight. A ship, barely visible through the dense mist, appeared on the water. It was an old vessel, its sails tattered and hull weathered, moving silently across the waves. Henry squinted, trying to make out the details, but the fog seemed to swallow the ship whole. He blinked, and it was gone, as if it had never been there. Shaking his head, Henry dismissed the vision as a trick of the light. He had been alone on the island for too long, his mind playing tricks on him. But that night, as he lay in his small, sparsely furnished quarters, the image of the ghostly ship lingered in his thoughts. The wind outside rattled the window panes, and he pulled the blanket tighter around himself, seeking comfort in its warmth. Days turned into weeks, and the sightings of the strange ship became more frequent. Each time, it appeared briefly in the fog, only to vanish moments later. Henry began to feel a growing sense of dread, his nerves fraying with each passing day. The isolation that had once been a source of solace now felt like a suffocating weight, pressing down on him with unbearable intensity. One stormy night, the tension reached a breaking point. The wind howled with a ferocity that shook the lighthouse to its very foundations. Rain lashed against the windows, and the waves crashed against the rocks with a deafening roar. Henry was in the lantern room, adjusting the light, when he saw it again. The ghostly ship, illuminated by a flash of lightning. This time, it was closer, the details more distinct. He could see figures moving on the deck, their faces obscured by the mist. As he watched, one of the figures turned towards him, its eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. Henry's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He stumbled back, knocking over a lantern, the flames sputtering and dying. In the sudden darkness, the lighthouse felt like a tomb, the oppressive silence broken only by the storm raging outside. Henry fumbled for the matches, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He struck one, the brief flare of light revealing the fear etched on his face. He lit the lantern again, the warm glow casting long shadows on the walls. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to calm down, repeating a silent mantra. It's just your imagination. There's nothing there. But as he descended the spiral staircase to his quarters, the whispers began. Faint at first, barely audible over the howling wind, but growing louder with each step. Voices, speaking in a language he didn't understand, filled the air around him. He covered his ears, trying to block out the sound, but it seeped into his mind, insistent and unrelenting. Henry reached his quarters and slammed the door shut, leaning against it as if to keep the voices at bay. His heart raced, and sweat poured down his face. He felt the island closing in on him, the isolation turning from a silent companion into a menacing force. Every shadow seemed to hide a secret, every creak of the lighthouse a reminder of his growing paranoia. That night, Sleep eluded him. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the whispers echoing in his mind. He wondered if he was losing his sanity, if the isolation had finally broken him. The ghostly ship, the eerie figures, the haunting voices, all seemed to point to a reality that was unraveling before his eyes. As dawn broke, Henry rose from his bed, exhausted and haunted by the events of the night. He knew he had to get to the bottom of the mystery that plagued him. Determined, he resolved to uncover the truth behind the strange occurrences, even if it meant confronting his deepest fears. Little did he know, the answers he sought would lead him down a path of unimaginable terror, one that would test the limits of his courage and sanity. Henry Thorne's journey into darkness had only just begun. The storm had subsided by morning, leaving the island shrouded in an eerie calm. The fog clung to the ground like a living entity, swirling around Henry's ankles as he stepped outside the lighthouse. The air was thick with the scent of salt and decay, a reminder of the unforgiving sea that surrounded him. He scanned the horizon, half expecting to see the ghostly ship once more, but the waters were empty, save for the relentless waves crashing against the rocks. As the day wore on, Henry tried to lose himself in his routine, hoping the familiar tasks would steady his frayed nerves. He cleaned the lantern room, polished the lenses, and checked the machinery, his movements mechanical and devoid of their usual purpose. The lighthouse, his sanctuary for so many years, now felt like a prison, its walls closing in around him with each passing hour. By evening, the fog had thickened again, rolling in from the sea like a living shroud. Henry stood at the edge of the cliff, staring into the mist, his heart heavy with unease. He could feel the island's oppressive silence pressing down on him, a palpable weight that made it hard to breathe. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he turned to head back inside, but something stopped him. A figure emerged from the fog, moving towards him with an unnatural grace. Henry's heart skipped a beat as he watched the figure draw closer, its form becoming clearer with each step. It was a man, drenched and bedraggled, his clothes tattered and torn. His face was pale, almost translucent, with eyes that glowed with an eerie, otherworldly light. "Who are you?" Henry called out, his voice trembling. "What do you want?" The man stopped a few feet away, his gaze fixed on Henry. "My name is Captain Elias Harper," he said, his voice a hollow echo that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I was the captain of the Sea Queen, a ship that met its end in these cursed waters many years ago." Henry took a step back, his mind reeling. He had heard stories of the Sea Queen, a ship that had vanished without a trace decades ago, its fate a mystery that had haunted sailors for generations. But to see the ghost of its captain standing before him was something he could hardly comprehend. What happened to your ship?" Henry asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Elias's eyes darkened with sorrow. "We were lured here by a false light, a beacon that promised safety but delivered only death. A monstrous creature dwells in these waters, a beast of unimaginable horror. It dragged my ship to the depths, along with all my men. I am the only one left, condemned to wander these shores, warning others of the danger that lurks beneath the waves." Henry felt a chill run down his spine. The ghostly ship, the eerie whispers, the strange occurrences, they all began to make a horrifying sense. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Because you are the keeper of the light," Elias replied. "The creature is drawn to the lighthouse, mistaking it for the false beacon that led my ship to its doom. You must find a way to stop it, to break the curse that binds this island." Henry stared at the ghostly captain, his mind racing. The idea of a monstrous sea creature seemed absurd, yet he could not deny the evidence before him. "How?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "How do I stop it?" Elias's expression grew grave. "There is a ritual, an ancient rite that can appease the beast. But it is dangerous, and the price is high." You must be prepared to face the darkest depths of your soul, to confront the horrors that lie within. Henry's heart pounded in his chest. The thought of performing a ritual to appease a sea monster seemed ludicrous, but he had no other choice. The island was cursed, and he was its keeper. "Tell me what I need to do," he said, his voice steady despite his fear. Elias nodded, his ghostly form shimmering in the fading light. "You must gather the necessary items for the ritual. Ancient relics that are hidden on this island. They are guarded by the spirits of those who have perished here, and you must prove yourself worthy to obtain them." Henry felt a surge of determination. He had faced many challenges in his life, but nothing like this. Yet he could not let fear control him. "Where do I start?" he asked. Elias pointed towards the dense forest that covered the island's interior. "The first relic is hidden in the heart of the forest, in a place where the living dare not tread. Be cautious, for the spirits will test your resolve." Henry took a deep breath, steeling himself for the task ahead. He turned towards the forest, the weight of his responsibility heavy on his shoulders. As he ventured into the dark, tangled woods, he could feel the eyes of the island upon him, watching, waiting. The fog thickened around him, the trees closing in, and he knew that his journey had only just begun. The further he went, the darker and more oppressive the forest became. Shadows moved at the edges of his vision, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. Henry pressed on, driven by a mixture of fear and determination. He had to find the relic, to prove himself worthy, to save the island from the curse that plagued it. After what felt like hours, he came upon a clearing. In the center stood an ancient stone altar, covered in moss and vines. On the altar lay a small, intricately carved wooden box. Henry approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached out and touched the box, feeling a jolt of energy course through him. Suddenly, the air grew cold, and the whispers rose to a deafening roar. Spirits materialized around him, their faces twisted in agony and rage. Henry stood his ground, his resolve unshaken. "I am here to end the curse," he said, his voice firm. "I will do whatever it takes." The spirits seemed to consider his words, their anger slowly dissipating. One by one, they faded away, leaving Henry alone in the clearing. He opened the box and found a small, weathered talisman inside. He could feel its power, a tangible force that pulsed in his hand. With the first relic in his possession, Henry turned back towards the lighthouse. The journey had only just begun, but he was determined to see it through. The ghostly captain's warning echoed in his mind, and he knew that the true test lay ahead. As he emerged from the forest, the lighthouse beacon cutting through the fog, he steeled himself for the trials to come. Henry Thorne was ready to face the darkness, to confront the horrors that awaited him, and to break the curse that had claimed so many lives. Little did he know, the path he had chosen would lead him to the brink of madness and beyond, into a realm where the line between reality and nightmare blurred, and where the true nature of the island's curse would be revealed in all its terrifying glory. The night after retrieving the first relic, Henry barely slept. The whispers and ghostly visions haunted his dreams, dragging him to the brink of madness. As dawn broke, he sat at the small wooden desk in his quarters, the talisman lying before him, its ancient carvings almost glowing in the morning light. Henry turned to the old journals and maps he had discovered in the lighthouse's dusty storeroom. The previous keepers had documented strange occurrences and vanishing ships, their entries filled with fear and desperation. One journal, older and more fragile than the others, mentioned the same ritual Elias had spoken of, hinting at a way to break the curse. The journal's brittle pages revealed the existence of 3 more relics needed for the ritual, each hidden in a different part of the island. The next relic, according to the journal, was buried in the island's cemetery, among the graves of the lost sailors. The thought of venturing into the cemetery sent a chill down Henry's spine, but he knew he had no choice. As he prepared to leave, Henry noticed the fog had thickened again, swirling around the lighthouse like a living entity. He gripped the talisman tightly, feeling its reassuring weight in his hand, and set out towards the cemetery, his footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The cemetery was a desolate place, overgrown with weeds and shrouded in mist. Ancient headstones jutted from the ground like skeletal fingers, their inscriptions worn away by time. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. Henry felt a sense of foreboding as he walked among the graves, searching for the next relic. He came upon a large, weathered tombstone, its surface covered in moss. The journal had mentioned a grave marked with an anchor, and this was the only one that matched the description. Kneeling down, Henry brushed away the moss and began to dig. The earth was cold and unyielding, but he pressed on, driven by a sense of urgency. As he dug, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than before. Ghostly figures appeared at the edges of his vision, watching him with hollow eyes. Henry's hands shook, but he continued, knowing he had to see this through. Finally, his fingers brushed against something hard and metallic. He pulled it from the earth, revealing an ornate dagger with a jeweled hilt. The air grew colder, and the spirits closed in around him. Henry held the dagger aloft, its blade glinting in the dim light. "I seek to end the curse," he said, his voice firm. "I will not be deterred." The spirits seemed to hesitate, their forms flickering like candle flames. One of them, a tall figure with a captain's hat, stepped forward. Henry recognized him as Elias. The ghostly captain's eyes were filled with sorrow and fear. "The relics are only part of the solution," Elias said, his voice echoing in the stillness. "You must uncover the true nature of the curse to break it." Henry nodded, his resolve strengthening. "Tell me what I need to do," he said. Elias gestured towards the lighthouse. "The final relic lies within the lighthouse itself, hidden in a place where light meets shadow. It is the key to unlocking the island's darkest secrets." Henry made his way back to the lighthouse, the dagger and talisman safely tucked into his coat. As he approached, he noticed the fog had thickened even more, swallowing the lighthouse's beam and casting the island into an impenetrable gloom. The lighthouse loomed above him, a monolithic sentinel standing guard over the cursed waters. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of oil and salt. The beams of light cut through the darkness, creating an eerie dance of shadows on the walls. Henry searched the lighthouse meticulously, his mind racing with thoughts of what he might find. He scoured every nook and cranny, but the final relic eluded him. Frustration gnawed at him, and he felt the weight of the curse pressing down. Then, in a moment of clarity, he remembered the hidden chamber beneath the lighthouse, a place he had discovered years ago, but never fully explored. He descended the narrow spiral staircase, the air growing colder with each step. The chamber was a small, damp room filled with ancient artifacts and a musty smell. Henry's eyes fell upon a weathered chest in the corner. He approached it cautiously, his heart pounding. The chest was locked, but the dagger's jeweled hilt seemed to fit perfectly into the keyhole. He turned it, and the lock clicked open. Inside, he found the final relic. An ancient book bound in cracked leather, its pages filled with arcane symbols and rituals. As Henry lifted the book from the chest, a gust of cold air swept through the chamber, extinguishing the light from his lantern. The darkness was absolute, and the whispers returned, louder and more menacing. He could feel the presence of the spirits, their anger palpable. Clutching the book tightly, he made his way back up the staircase, his mind racing. In the lantern room, Henry lit the lamp again, the warm glow casting a circle of light in the darkness. He opened the book, his eyes scanning the ancient text. The ritual to break the curse was detailed within, a complex and dangerous rite that required precise execution. The final step involved using the relics to summon and confront the sea monster, a task fraught with unimaginable peril. Henry felt a chill run down his spine as he read the final lines. The ritual required a sacrifice, a life given willingly to appease the beast. He thought of Elias's warning and realized the true gravity of what lay ahead. He was prepared to face the darkness, to confront the monster that had claimed so many lives. But could he find the strength to make the ultimate sacrifice? As he pondered his next move, the lighthouse shook with a sudden, violent force. The walls groaned, and the air filled with the sound of rushing water. The sea monster was near, drawn by the light and the relics. Henry knew he had no time to lose. He gathered the relics and the ancient book, steeling himself for the final confrontation. As he stepped outside, the island was engulfed in a thick, impenetrable fog. The air was charged with electricity, and the ground trembled beneath his feet. He could feel the presence of the sea monster, a malevolent force lurking just beyond the edge of his vision. The time had come to face the horror and to confront the curse that had plagued the island for so long. With the relics in hand and the ancient book clutched to his chest, Henry Thorne walked into the fog, ready to confront the beast and unravel the mystery of the cursed waters. The final battle was about to begin, and the fate of the island hung in the balance. Henry's hands trembled as he placed the relics on the small wooden table in the lantern room. The ancient book lay open before him, its pages filled with arcane symbols and instructions. He read them over and over, trying to burn them into his memory. But the words seemed to blur and dance on the page, mocking his efforts. He glanced out the window at the roiling sea, the waves crashing against the rocks with an intensity that mirrored his growing fear. He had spent the day gathering the necessary items for the ritual: the talisman, the dagger, and the ancient book. Each relic pulsed with an otherworldly energy, and Henry could feel their weight, not just in his hands, but in his very soul. He could sense the presence of the sea monster, lurking just beyond the edge of the fog, its malevolent gaze fixed on the lighthouse. The storm that had been brewing all day reached a fever pitch as night fell. The wind howled around the lighthouse, rattling the windows and shaking the walls. Rain lashed against the glass, and thunder rumbled in the distance, growing ever closer. Henry knew he had no choice but to proceed. The curse had to be broken, and he was the only one who could do it. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and began to chant the incantation. The words were foreign and guttural, their meaning lost to time, but they carried a weight of ancient power. As he spoke, the relics began to glow, a faint, eerie light that pulsed with each syllable. The fog outside seemed to react, swirling and twisting as if in response to the ritual. The ground beneath Henry's feet began to tremble, and a deep, rumbling growl echoed from the sea. He looked out the window and saw the monstrous form emerging from the water, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The sea monster was an abomination, a mass of writhing tentacles and jagged teeth, its scales glistening with a dark, oily sheen. It let out a roar that shook the very air, making Henry's heart race with fear. Despite his terror, Henry continued the chant, raising the glowing relics above his head. The light from the relics grew brighter, cutting through the fog and illuminating the monster's horrific visage. The creature recoiled slightly, its eyes narrowing as it regarded the light with a mixture of anger and fear. But then, something went wrong. The light from the relics flickered and dimmed, the power within them faltering. Henry's chant grew desperate, his voice rising above the storm, but it was no use. The ritual was failing. The monster let out another roar, this time of triumph, and surged forward, its massive body crashing against the rocks below the lighthouse. Henry's heart sank. He had done everything right, followed the instructions to the letter, but it was not enough. The monster was not appeased. The storm intensified, the wind howling like a banshee and the waves crashing with a deafening roar. Henry stumbled back, his mind racing with fear and confusion. Elias's ghostly form appeared beside him, his face etched with sorrow and regret. "It's no use, Henry," he said, his voice a hollow echo. "The ritual is flawed, or the curse is too powerful to break. I am sorry." Henry looked at Elias, despair gripping his heart. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the storm. Elias shook his head. There is nothing more we can do. The curse will take what it demands. In a climactic and horrifying moment, the sea monster surged forward, its tentacles wrapping around the lighthouse with crushing force. The ground shook violently, and Henry was thrown off his feet. He tried to scramble away, but a massive tentacle wrapped around his leg, pulling him towards the edge of the cliff. Henry screamed, a sound of pure terror that was quickly swallowed by the roar of the storm. He clawed at the ground, trying to find something to hold onto, but it was no use. The monster's grip was unrelenting. He felt the cold, slimy tentacle tighten around him, dragging him towards the dark, churning waters below. Elias reached out, his ghostly form shimmering in the eerie light. "I'm sorry, Henry," he said, his voice filled with anguish. "I'm so sorry." Henry's screams echoed above the roaring waves as he was pulled into the sea. The cold water closed over his head, silencing him abruptly. The last thing he saw was the lighthouse's beam cutting through the fog, a lone beacon of light in the darkness. The storm subsided as quickly as it had begun, leaving the island in an eerie calm. The lighthouse stood tall, its light still piercing through the fog, but now with a more sinister undertone. The sea was calm once more, the waves gently lapping against the rocks as if nothing had happened. But the curse remained, a dark presence lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the next soul to claim. The island was silent, save for the mournful cry of a distant gull, and the lighthouse's beams swept across the waters. Years passed, and the island remained as desolate and foreboding as ever. The lighthouse stood tall, its beams sweeping across the treacherous waters, a lone sentinel against the encroaching darkness. The tale of Henry Thorne and the sea monster had become a whispered legend among the few who dared to speak of the cursed island. The new lighthouse keeper, Jonathan Blake, arrived on a crisp autumn day, the air filled with the scent of salt and decay. He was a young man, eager to prove himself in the isolation of the lighthouse. As he stepped onto the rocky shore, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on him. Jonathan explored the lighthouse, finding it well-maintained despite its years of solitude. In the lantern room, he discovered an old journal, its pages yellowed with age. The cover was embossed with the initials HT, and as he opened it, he felt a chill run down his spine. The journal detailed Henry Thorne's final days, his harrowing encounters with the sea monster, and the failed ritual. The entries were filled with a growing sense of dread and desperation, culminating in a final, hastily scrawled note. "The curse cannot be broken. The monster will return. Beware the fog, for it brings death." Jonathan closed the journal, his hands trembling. He had heard the stories of the cursed island, but reading Henry's words brought the reality crashing down on him. He knew he had to remain vigilant, to keep the light burning, for the safety of any ship that might stray too close to the island's deadly shores. Days turned into weeks, and Jonathan settled into a routine, much like Henry before him. The isolation weighed heavily on him, the oppressive silence broken only by the distant cry of seabirds and the relentless crash of waves. He often found himself staring out into the fog, half expecting to see the ghostly ship that haunted Henry's final days. One stormy night, as the wind howled and the rain lashed against the windows, Jonathan heard it. The faint, mournful wail that seemed to rise from the depths of the ocean. He felt a chill run down his spine and remembered Henry's warning. He grabbed the journal and read the final entry once more, the words burning into his mind. The lighthouse shook with a violent force, and Jonathan rushed to the lantern room, his heart pounding. The beam of light cut through the fog, illuminating the dark, churning waters below. As he peered into the mist, he saw it, a massive, grotesque form rising from the sea, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The sea monster had returned.